welcome to Unexpected Points. Kevin Cole here. I am sans Josh Hermsmeyer this week. Got a little note from Herms this morning that he hadn't been paying that close of attention to what was going on in this week 8 action. So, of course, my natural response was like, yeah, how does that differ from any other week when it comes to my man Herms? I kid. But I also joke with them that maybe, watching too much of what's going on and not just reacting to the numbers and other things could also be a disadvantage. Let's not watch too much film, guys. Let's not break down too much all 22. I love it when confident film takes come out and they say the film says X and it matches like what everyone who's, just watching the old TV broadcast also thinks. Anyway, I'll get into more film taking, bashing going forward, but let me just quickly say the agenda here. Those who have tuned into solo episodes in the past where I've gone through some of the adjusted scores and things like that, I'm going to do some of that for some games where they may not comport the actual and adjusted scores. So I'll talk about some of that. I'll talk about some of my power rankings where they may be a little dissimilar to markets right now, although on Tuesday, the markets are a little bit iffy when we're looking at those sorts of things. But first, I want to start with some topical stuff, with the news stuff, drives the views, get people interested. Anthony Richardson. Is he benched or is he not? I don't know. I guess this could all be a big to-do about nothing if he is not benched. But after a mediocre performance, let's say, by EPA, he actually doesn't look that bad in some of these games because of some rushing value that he's adding, and he's making like one really big pass down the field, which generates a lot of value. Although it won't look that good on adjusted EPA because it was mostly yak in this circumstance. He's had some other long passes where he gets a lot of value because he's chucking it 60 yards in the air. But outside of that, really leaned into the troubling aspects of his play, specifically the 10 for 32, I believe, passing the ball. Not so hot. I had mentioned last week that in 5 of his 6 starts where he had at least 15 passes, he did not get higher than a 50% completion rate. I guess we can add that to another one here. So another game without getting to 50% completion rate. And they lost the game against the Houston Texans. So there's that. And then after the game, explanations were asked about why he was taken out. He was tapping the helmet, which means like I need normally you'd see that from a running back or maybe a wide receiver or someone just made a big play running down the field. Like I need a blow. I need to get out of the game, but no one was sure whether it was that, whether it was an injury, what ended up happening. That he took himself out after a scramble play where he had to shake off a tackler and move around. I think he ended up getting 0 yards on this big scramble. And it was something like 3rd and 23 after that. So it wasn't like they had a great chance of doing that much at that point. But he did the tap on the old helmet. He came out. And then after the game, he was asked about it. And he said, I'm not going to lie, I was tired. Now, as some people have suggested on this is, maybe he should have considered lying on this one. Like, no, he's not obligated to tell the truth to the media here. I don't think he did himself any favors by doing that. I don't think he's earning confidence and enhancing his legitimacy, getting that award for, best locker room media guy by telling everyone that he came out because he was tired, because that has now become way too big a part of this story. I saw Chase Daniels saying that, it's like the most horrific thing that he's ever seen in his entire life. I mean, he didn't say that, but it was something to that effect. Well, not really, not to that effect, but you know what I mean. It was a complete overstatement of everything. No one has ever seen this happen before for a quarterback. Whether it has or not, I'm not quite sure. This is a little bit of a unique environment we're in with these rushing quarterbacks, though, and what's happening. But, I'm not here to defend his actions. It's a clear no. you clearly stay in the game. And, if you're trying to defend his actions by saying it was a low probability play where they just handed the ball off anyway and nothing ended up happening, well, that's not an argument for why it was okay that he got out of the game. If anything, you want to say the quarterback stays in no matter how kind of improbable the circumstances may be for being able to produce something. But that's being made a bigger deal because of the fact they lost, because of the fact these look bad, because of the fact these consistently looked bad, because of the fact that we haven't seen improvement or development, and because of the fact that Joe Flacco looked pretty good when he came in. Not only did Joe Flacco look pretty good this year, actually he's looked really good this year. I think he's averaging something like a quarter of a expected point added per play, which would put him, in the top 5-ish sort of range if he had enough attempts. Now, clearly, if he had played more, it's probably going to come down a bit, probably going to regress down to where he really belongs at. But remember, Flacco was also comeback player of the year last year, to the chagrin of the NFL awards market, where they had to, redo the whole comeback player of the year qualifications to make sure that doesn't happen again this year, that someone who just didn't play the year before can't be called the comeback player of the year the next year. But there's some good vibes around him. There's some vibes of we can win with this guy. There's a vibes of, I think importantly, when it comes to coaching, and this is when people are asking, why would coaches even consider benching him? And maybe I skipped past a little detail here that you guys probably all know, was that when the coaches were asked about it, Shane Steichen was asked about it. He was in the we're evaluating everything, which is coach speak for he gone. He gone to the bench. Okay, that's what it's coach speak for. Because, well, maybe it's possible that it's not. You never know. It's possible that it's not, but the coaches get no benefit from being open and honest and saying, yeah, we are evaluating things, and and then it's still being like a 50-50 chance what'll end up happening. In fact, plenty of times coaches will say, no way, he's not going to the bench. We're not benching him. No. And then like 2 days later, go ahead and bench him. And no one really cares as long as the results are good going forward. So the fact that Steichen's already put that out there makes a lot of people think that he may be going to the bench. And now the takes are flying as to if it's a good thing, if it's a bad thing, what are the ramifications, everything else. Now, I think it's important in this discussion, just like all discussions that I try to have on here, that we take a step back, and before we make any declarations about anything, and maybe we never make declarations about anything, maybe that's kind of the important takeaway, is just recognize the uncertainty of what may happen going forward. Well, you end up seeing a lot in, like, let's say when Drake May came in to play for the Patriots. And maybe this isn't the greatest point now that he's been concussed, although it was on a scramble down the field. So it didn't really have to do with the poor protection he had or anything like that. But there were these declarations that Drake May can't succeed behind this offensive line with this supporting cast. You can't do this. He won't succeed. They don't say it's impossible, but you're saying that X cannot happen, which we know the X they're saying that cannot happen happens all the time. Drake May's actually looked pretty good when he's been in there. The same thing could have been said in some ways about CJ Stroud last year before he played, looking at that god-awful offensive line and what we thought was the lack of receiving talent around him. We didn't know Tank Dell was going to be Tank Dell. We didn't know Nico Collins was going to be Nico Collins. So at that point in time, we could have said, oh boy, it's looking bad. It's looking bad there. It can't be successful. So let's not make those declarations. There's all kinds of things that people say, well, you can't do this, you can't do that. You can't develop 2 QBs at the same time. That's one of my favorite, things that annoy me when people are talking about drafting more quarterbacks, even though the evidence goes against it. So when it comes to Richardson, you can't do X arguments are mostly coming on the side of why Richardson cannot be benched in this circumstance. So, what are the arguments for why he should not be benched here? Um, One that I've seen is that he can't develop. He needs to develop. Famously, only played one starting college season. Didn't get a ton of reps even in that season relative to what some others do nowadays, where they're chucking it up 50 times a game. Um, Came into the NFL, played some as a rookie, then injuries took him out, and has only had several, but not a significant number of starts now. So the argument is you need to play to develop, which is kind of interesting because there's also like, even when you talk the Drake May, it was almost the opposite argument. Like if you play him, then it'll somehow stunt his development. Again, both things don't really have evidence behind them. They have vibes behind them. They have feelings behind them. They have examples in the past that we might point to about when quarterbacks weren't successful, when they played with poor surroundings. And rather than saying maybe those guys just weren't good, we had great draft evaluations of them. So we say, they failed because of the poor surroundings. So now, and then we just forget all the times where guys were great because of good surroundings. Now we've had recently a lot more guys playing earlier, getting those reps, and then some of them becoming successful. Josh Allen's going to be one of those guys that people want to talk about. I'm going to put him aside for now. Come back to Josh Allen. That'll be a big part of the discussion. Josh Allen kind of colors all of our ideas about drafting and developing quarterbacks now at this point. It's probably influential in the drafting of Anthony Richardson at number 3 overall, and the arguments by many who were saying you can't bench him now, who wanted Anthony Richardson to go number 1 overall in the 2023 draft. But the idea that you need to play to develop, what's the evidence there? Now, the like stats, numbers, box score, nerd shit basis for this is a logical basis. And this what happens a lot of times, right? We have logic that plays in one direction. The problem is we don't really know the strength of how much that factor is. Like that factor that should exist because it logically exists. How important is it? Is sometimes lost. Sometimes we could say, yeah, logically, I get it. It's a thing. Like running the ball wears down the defense. Yeah, like logically, I get how that's a thing. Keeping the defense on the field for a longer amount of time. Yeah, I kind of, I get how that's logically a thing. But is it important enough to like give up other things? The cost is the benefit strong enough to outweigh the costs? Are we going to really look into the benefits? That's kind of lost because we say, oh, I have an argument. I have some logic behind my argument. So therefore, case closed. Let's just move on at that point. I win the argument. And that's what's happening with the development thing with Richardson is you could say, logically, getting good at playing quarterback in the NFL, it probably helps to play quarterback in the NFL. There's only so much you can replicate when it comes to being a quarterback. There's only so much you can replicate in practice, running the scout team, doing things like that. You're not getting those first team reps in practice. Most of the time, they're not doing stuff like that. The Patriots actually supposedly were splitting some of that up before May even became a starting quarterback. I like that. But a lot of times it's more the famous Tom Moore quote where I think it was Gruden and when he was part of the television crew, I assume it was Monday Night Football, went with Jaworski at the time to visit a Colts practice. And there's a famous quote there from the offensive coordinator, Tom Moore, where they asked him, they said, hey, Tom, how come none of the other quarterbacks other than Peyton Manning are taking any of the practice snaps? 0 practice snaps for anyone other than Peyton Manning. And I may butcher this a little bit, but Tom Moore's response was, well, if 18, of course, Peyton Manning's number, if 18 goes down, we're fucked. And we don't practice fucked. So, that's kind of the overwhelming philosophy of a lot of these teams. So if you're not getting those first team practice reps, you're not getting the in-game sort of spatial awareness and judging the rush and doing all those sorts of things you're getting, you may not be developing in the same sort of way. I think there's logic to that. There is something to that. Now, there's harm that you can suffer being in there physically. I don't know about mentally. I don't know about being psyched out. I don't know about being ruined. I don't know about hearing footsteps. I don't know about all that stuff. That's a little bit, more nebulous. Could exist, could not exist to some degree. But physically, of course, you could get damaged if you're not ready to play by taking sacks, by the speed of the game being a little bit too much for you, by when you're scrambling, maybe these linebackers are closing down on linebackers and safeties and defensive backs are closing down on you, or even defensive linemen are closing down on you a little bit faster than you would have thought. So there's downside there. But when we're going to make some sort of declarative statement of you need to play to develop, playtime equals development. While that might be true to a very slight degree, the question is it a necessary condition, right? Is it something that you need to have? It can help, but is it something that you need to have? And a lot of people, when they're talking about Richardson, are acting like it is a must-have sort of thing. But we've seen Patrick Mahomes win an MVP in his second season after starting a meaningless Game 17 at the end of his rookie year. Just running the scout team. I think I said practice squad earlier. I meant scout team. Running the scout team all season long. We've seen now most recently Jordan Love kind of come in and take over the starter role after years of sitting behind. We saw Aaron Rodgers kind of come in and, well, he wasn't, MVP Aaron Rodgers right out the bat. He was pretty good. He's pretty good starting after sitting for a few years behind Brett Favre. Seeing lots of guys who come in who have shown they probably did some sort of development even though they weren't playing. And the reason I can say that is that when it comes to Patrick Mahomes, let's say, and winning the MVP, I think it's highly unlikely that we can treat his second season, we can treat his week one of his second season as being his second start. Just ignore the fact of the starts are in the first year or in the second year and just say that was a second start. That is not the equivalent of a second start week two of your rookie year. It's just not. The guys who have the most fantastic rookie years as quarterbacks in recent memory, CJ Stroud, Justin Herbert, RG3, if you want to go back further, Cam Newton, Russell Wilson was pretty good. Matt Ryan was pretty good. All those guys, even as rookies, even as top-notch rookies, were not really competing to be elite quarterbacks in a sense of putting up top 5, top 3 EPA per play. Patrick Mahomes was doing that in his second season. There was development in that first season that he stepped in his second season. Jordan Love, maybe he's not getting all the way up near the top, but, I think it's safe to say he developed while he was there. It's safe to say Aaron Rodgers and other guys developed while he was there. So we have seen it. We've seen guys sit and not play and develop. It's just the case that there are few instances where a really good quarterback, a really high draft pick and good quarterback will sit behind a veteran quarterback for very long because teams like to win, so they bring them in earlier. So just because we're not seeing situations that often of quarterbacks developing when they're sitting, it's because it's of the sample, right? We just don't have a lot of examples of good quarterbacks sitting. You have to be sitting behind a Hall of Famer. You have to be sitting behind an Alex Smith who was having an MVP adjacent type of season in 2017. You have to be sitting in those situations. So this is something that I've mentioned plenty of times where, depending upon the results of the last great quarterback to come out in the NFL, it'll either be you can't start them or you have to start them. You need to develop them or you're hurting their development, depending upon, again, what just happened in the most recent example. I think we've seen in both directions. If the quarterback's good, they'll probably develop well. If you sit them, they'll probably develop well if you don't sit them. So I think that argument for Anthony Richardson is false to say that he cannot develop while he's watching and running the scout team and trying to learn and work on his mechanics and do whatever else he's got to do. Because if we're talking about like getting better accuracy wise, and this is when we bring back Josh Allen, because Josh Allen is going to color a lot of this discussion here. When Allen did that, when he made that leap when it came to accuracy, it was between his second and third year, and that's what threw off a lot of people, because normally you see the leap after your rookie year. You don't see the second to third year leap. Normally you don't see guys who like learn how to throw an accurate pass after 2 years of being in the NFL. Normally they kind of taught that a little bit earlier along the way. But that was almost a night and day shift for Allen over the offseason. So like he didn't learn how to throw accurate passes every week, getting incrementally better. I mean, he was better in his second year than he was in his first year. But again, that was more of like a little mini leap. It wasn't seen as being enough of a leap to give him much of a chance of being a success. And I'll put myself in that category, being wrong there, because he went from, the low 50s to the high 50s in completion percentage, which still looks pretty bad in a league where almost everyone is doing 60% or higher. But then he made that huge leap up almost another 10% in his third year to get up into that category of like, okay, now we've hit the threshold where you can be an elite quarterback because you're completing so many passes. But that happened in the offseason. He reworked his form in the offseason. He did the quarterback coach thing. I don't know why he didn't do it earlier. Or maybe he did and it just didn't take. But he did that not playing. The development that Anthony Richardson needs that Josh Allen got was not part of playing. It was part of what happened in the offseason. So that, I think you can check off that box and kind of push that aside as saying that that's not a real sort of concern that we're seeing from some people out there. And when it comes to Allen generally, and this is why if you want to throw the bucket of saying, hey, this is just like Josh Allen, Josh Allen had similar sort of play, this and that. Again, Allen's someone who stepped forward in his second year. It was a disappointing step forward. It wasn't enough of a step forward as you would like to see, but it was a step forward. Again, low 50s completion percentage up to the high 50s. Negative EPA per play as a rookie, someone who was in the mid 20s efficiency wise, moved up to 20th, something like that. I mean, not great. Okay. It was still looking bad for an elite outcome for him, but there was some sort of movement there. Richardson, if you look at his numbers here, I'll bring them up just so I can make sure that I know what I'm talking about. I know it's a rarity, but we're going to try it here. His numbers not going in the right direction. I mean, he only played 4 games as a rookie. So I don't think it's part of this whole development thing. Like, I don't know if I'd put him on the exact same schedule as someone like Patrick Mahomes, who didn't play a lot as a rookie and then was an MVP as his second year. I think there are some circumstances where if you're injured, maybe you can't quite develop, but I still think you can develop if you're just on the bench and not playing. So rookie year, only 4 games, had slightly positive EPA per play. So that looks pretty good. I think the EPA per play thing is another aspect where if you want to be a Richardson defender, you can point to that because it's only slightly negative this year. So it's not really bad. It's not Josh Rosen. It's not Zach Wilson. It's not one of those things. But the problem is going on his second year here with the EPA per play stepping back, with the dropbacks per game actually stepping back. He's actually not even being used as much in the passing game. Very low amount for him versus other quarterbacks. Definitely, he's not like Tim Tebow, but they're not really running a normal NFL offense there. The accuracy getting a lot worse. He was 7.7% under expectation, CPOE. Completion percentage over expectation was a negative 7.7% as a rookie, which takes into account his ADOT. He had an 8-yard ADOT, which is a little bit on the longer side, but now 13 yards for an ADOT, 14.6 negative 14.6 CPOE. The worst measure that we've seen in a very long time in most of my advanced stats time. That'll probably progress up a bit before the end of the year and those sort of things. But if you're running an offense where your quarterback's not even completing, is barely completing, 40 something percent of their passes, they have a 13-yard ADOT. And I don't care whatever scheme you're saying they're running. Oh, they're running the wrong scheme. They're running the wrong scheme. Quarterbacks have options for where they can throw the ball. Okay. He doesn't have to chuck it down the field every single time. If you have that, as a rookie, he wasn't throwing many interceptions. He's throwing a lot of interceptions this year. They're losing stuff there. He has a lot of turnover-worthy throws that are not being intercepted. He's not taking a lot of sacks, so that's a positive, which has helped keep his EPA in check. But when he's actually dropping back to pass, the number gets worse, gets really, really bad for his EPA per play. And if you take out the scrambles, he's negative 0.2 EPA per drop back without the scrambles. That's a bad number. Okay. And I know it's a little bit of an issue, selection bias-ish, if you're like taking out the positive scrambles, but then keeping in the plays where there are negatives on sacks, which end up becoming scrambles. But just for illustration, where he stands with this number here for EPA per dropback, not counting scrambles, he is the 5th worst in the NFL this year. The worst, who have at least 100 dropbacks this year, Spencer Rattler, Bryce Young, Will Levis, Deshaun Watson, and next is Anthony Richardson. Following that, Mason Rudolph, Jacoby Brissett, Gardner Minshew, but even those guys are pretty significantly better, or at least incrementally better than what we've seen from Richardson this year. So what strains, like, again, I didn't think that Josh Allen was going to be a success after his second year. So, like, if you want to just say, well, you didn't get that right, so therefore anything you say going forward doesn't matter, okay, that's fine. But I think even if we're going to look back and we're going to try to be thoughtful about what differentiates having a chance of being successful or not, showing some improvement, I think, matters, right? If you're going to make a third-year leap, showing some improvement in that second year has to matter, and we're just not seeing that. And not only are we not seeing that, we're just not seeing a functional passing game. Sometimes we got to look past just the results and saying, oh, his EPA per play isn't bad, so therefore he has a floor to what he's doing. And, if the good things start to go well, then he'll be okay. Well, maybe, but you have to have hope. And I just don't think he's giving them a lot of hope. And that's why coaches, sometimes they'll go too far towards saying, well, this guy is a coachable guy and this guy is not a coachable guy. I think they kind of look at Anthony Richardson right now and they say, I just can't coach this guy because he can't implement, or at least he's not implementing what I'm trying to do offensively. Coaches overestimate how much and how well their teams will do if the quarterbacks just do what they're supposed to do, right? So there's an overestimation there, but still, he's just not doing it. I mean, Josh Allen in his second year, again, 58.8% completion percentage versus Anthony Richardson in the low 40s. Josh Allen had 461 pass attempts. So let's just do some math here. In 16 games, that's 29 pass attempts a game. Richardson's at something like 22. I think it's 25 if we adjust for time that he's missed so far this year, like quarters and stuff that he's missed. It's just a different type of game. The ADOT, right? Josh Allen in his ADOT. Oh, actually, do I have that here? In his ADOT, let me grab that. Josh Allen's ADOT for his second season was, first of all, it was 11 as a rookie, and then it went down to 9.3. Like, 11 really wasn't that functional. It was a negative 7% CPOE as a rookie. Yeah, that's not looking very functional. He brought that CPOE, was only slightly negative, and he brought that ADOT down. which is just a more functional passing offense for the NFL. And Richardson is just not doing that right now. So, I don't know if Joe Flacco is going to be any good, if Joe Flacco's definitely not going to play as well going forward all the way to the end of the season that we've seen from him so far this year. But I think what's missing in some of the arguments, and I saw some arguments online about why they should continue to stick Richardson is, and if this is maybe even some of the critiques you could have of the nerds and tanking and this and that is, you can't just always say, well, in a team full of 50 individuals, players, plus all these coaches who are trying to pull together to win, and they're trying to win, okay? Who are trying to pull together and win right now. We can't just say, you know what, let's continue to start Richardson because if he gets better magically, even though we have no inkling of that's going to happen in the near term, if he gets better magically, we'll have a great quarterback going forward. And there's basically no downside because even if he stinks, we just get a better draft pick for next year. Well, there isn't no downside. You can't just tell players who are putting their bodies on the line, who are working when it comes to coaches, 100-hour weeks, to say, well, there's no downside to starting this guy who can't functionally act as a quarterback right now. No, there's a lot of downside. There's a lot of downside in that locker room, and that's got to be a big part of this and has to be a consideration of this. And you can't ask in this sport. Maybe you can ask in some other sports when you got 10 games left in meaningless games left in an NBA season. You can ask guys to just check out. You can't ask guys to check out in the NFL if things start to go bad, continue to go bad over the next few games. So my overall thing is if they want to move on from, I don't think it hurts development. I think he needs a lot more work to do. I think it's probably a year 3 thing, if anything. And you're going to want him to have that development in the offseason. And if he has to sit and wait and watch, he can still try and get better. But I think he really needs to know that he has to be better. I don't care about the EPA. I don't care about the flashes. I don't care about anything else. He has to be better than what we've seen so far. You have to be functional, at least passing the ball. And we haven't seen that so far from Anthony Richardson. All right. Yeah, you guys can drop in some questions also in here if you want me to address anything. Since I got a little bit more time on my hands, maybe I'll just bring up a couple things over here. From Kieran 1017. Maybe I shouldn't read these handles. It ends up taking too long. Over under Richardson being a bust already. I don't know. I mean, the cold-blooded analysis here is that while you can't say anything with certainty, I mean, he's probably not going to make it, I would say at this point. I mean, he's not like, you can't treat him equally to other second-year quarterbacks because he has missed time. And he probably missed some development with injuries and things like that as a rookie, but not looking good. Could happen, though. We don't know anything, but not looking good, at least so far. Richardson benched, just made it official. Yeah, okay, good. I'm glad I did have this whole I'm glad I didn't have this whole discussion and then he didn't end up being benched. That would have been bad. Something a little bit here on Lamar. This is interesting. Lamar wasn't that good in his. I'm sorry, I'm reading one of the comments here on YouTube. Lamar wasn't that good in his first season, but Ravens designed their offense for him. Is it all on Richardson, or do coaches take part in the blame? Well, I mean, I think if we look at that first Lamar season, I'll agree that it was shaky. I wouldn't have been super confident in Lamar going forward because number one, he didn't displace Flacco for a while. But they were doing well, right? They were like a playoff bound-ish sort of team, maybe. So I wouldn't have been that worried about it. But yeah, it didn't look great going on. But I also think rookie season, 32nd overall pick, Lamar Jackson, Joe Flacco, Super Bowl winning. I mean, he's not elite. He's not elite, Joe Flacco, but Super Bowl winner, Joe Flacco ahead of you. It makes some sense, maybe why everything wasn't perfectly set up to anoint Lamar Jackson and have him ready to go. There might have been some, okay, let's see what's going on here before we kind of hitch our wagon with a bunch of, good veteran players who expect to make the playoffs and be pretty good this year. Before we hitch our wagon to old Lamar, um, and change around the whole offense for him, let's wait a little bit. And then, second year, boom, what do we see from Lamar Jackson? His best season. I'm still putting that as his best season, not this year. I know it's like everyone wants to the Lamar Jackson inflationary effects. Is something. I don't want to be down on Lamar just because some people are way too high on Lamar, but it is like he does get in certain quarters, he does get kind of like crazy love here. I'm still gonna say 2019 was a bit better for him. But with Richardson now, I mean, we're going on like Shane Steichen second year there, Richardson's second year there. He was the guy who worked with Jalen Hurts, right? Who got a lot out of Jalen Hurts despite a lot of people did not like him as a prospect. When I wrote the article saying Jalen Hurts was not a good pick, but a great pick for the Eagles, a lot of people did not like that, and they wanted to, I remember I get on these I got radio interviews with guys in Philly who were like, "Yeah, but I watched it, and he can't execute an offense." This and that. And I'm like, guys, I don't know anything. I don't know if he can execute an offense, and I do know that you probably don't really know whether he can execute an offense. Also, all I know is like it's a low-cost pick that has upside, and you don't know that Carson Wentz is the guy. That was my whole argument. So the thing is for Richardson now, like, wouldn't Shane Steichen be a good guy if he had done this before? I think it's just weird that he's actually like they've almost translated the offense to go further away from a normal sort of offense and more of a we're going to run the ball and take big shots down the field, roll the dice basically 6-7 times a game and hope that we hit on a couple of those. And they hit on one last game. They didn't hit on some others, but even that one that they hit on was the guy was like a blown coverage and completely wide open for like a 70-yard touchdown. So yeah, the blame always gets spread around, but when we can't really diagnose what's going on, and you're going to see guys who think they can, like guys who like Richardson as a prospect and don't want him benched, magically they're going to find things when they watch the tape that says it's not Richardson's fault and it's the coach's fault. Guys who didn't like Richardson are going to watch the tape and magically they're going to find things that say it's all Richardson's fault and not the coach's fault at all. Especially when Flacco comes in and does really well, right? So I fall into the without overwhelming evidence pushing us in either direction, let's just assume it's mostly the quarterback's fault or credit or blame. Either way, Matt, that's what I'm going to go. That's what I'm going to go with there. This interesting one here says Lamar Jackson was a better prospect than Richardson. Richardson has always been a bit of a Hail Mary, self-triggered as a Bears fan. Yeah, sorry about that, Bears fans. Although, according to my adjusted scores, Commanders were the better team. So, I know that makes it hurt a lot less for people out there. But, I don't know what to do about this, who's a better prospect or not. I see this a lot where it's like, oh, this quarterback who was taken 32nd overall was actually better a prospect than this guy who went 3rd overall. Normally, I would reject that premise. It was Justin Fields, who I heard a lot in the past. It was like, well, Justin Fields is a better prospect than, some quarterback that went like number 1, at some other point. It's just like, I don't know. I mean, he didn't go, he didn't go number 1. What was he, 12th overall pick? It's hard to say like he's definitively a better prospect when they was taken later. Now, in this case, I think Richardson does get pushed up on the Josh Allen factor and all that sort of stuff, but I'm not sure if it's enough. I mean, I think like functionally, he did some stuff throwing the ball in college, which at least aesthetically looks better than Lamar Jackson. And maybe that had something to do with it. Last comment on here before I get to some other stuff. I feel like all the injuries makes it worse than if he was just garbage every game in and out because it just signals he's not durable enough to play quarterback. Well, yeah, I mean, I don't want to go too far in that direction either. I mean, I do think there was too much of a feeling in circles of, oh, you normally get injured in the pocket. So therefore, if you're a running quarterback, you're not actually more vulnerable to getting injured. And, that's kind of been dispelled now that we have like a good sample of rushing quarterbacks. And we've seen, Cam Newton take some pretty bad hits. We've seen Kyler Murray get injured because of stuff. We've seen Anthony Richardson here get injured running the ball. Seen Lamar Jackson even get injured, when he was doing some stuff. So yeah, it doesn't help to be running so much. But I also think that there is a randomness component to a lot of these things. So declaring anyone injury prone or not, I don't know. But his style of play is going to give him a few more injuries than some others. Okay, so let's go into kind of digesting some more stuff from the weekend. Maybe I'll go ahead and bring it up so you guys can get a little view here if you're on YouTube of the old unexpected points power rankings, the post here. So week 9 power rankings. I'll tell you the numbers I got, and then I'll tell you whether I believe them or not. I mean, first of all, I have a little plot up here which looks at schedule adjusted by me. Performance offensively, defensively, and then the tiering gives about a 60-40 importance to offense versus defense going forward. It's still wild to me to see the Ravens, who I have number 1 offensively, to see the Ravens be so bad defensively. So that's what's holding them down a little bit versus the market. I think the market's still probably going to have the Chiefs as number 1. Let me just check to make sure, because they were. Oh no, Detroit. What? Okay, I don't know if I even trust this immediately because I had Detroit number 1 last week. I actually had Detroit. That's one of the games I would like to point to, actually, as far as being a little bit misleading the results. Because if we go to my adjusted score stuff for the Lions, Titans. I mean, it's the Titans, so like who cares? But they won by 38, and my adjusted score was actually only 8 on this one. Mostly because they just had these like insane special teams and turnover advantages, and like their offensive efficiency wasn't even that good. It was a 60th percentile type of offensive efficiency. Their efficiency passing the ball was really not good. Like Jared Goff kind of had a stinker game, but it didn't matter. He had 4 touchdown passes. 3 touchdown passes, which is crazy because he had a net 52 yards passing if you take out the 33 sack yards that he had. So I don't know. That's why I guess I'm a little bit more down on the Lions, even though I had them at number 1 last week. So that would have matched what the markets are saying now. Who else do the markets have here? They have KC at number 2, Baltimore, San Francisco, and then Buffalo. Okay, so that's a difference there, which is interesting because I was kind of high on the 49ers earlier this year, but now I have the 49ers kind of falling into almost like a second tier. So Bills, I'm probably too high on the Bills, but whatever. They have Josh Allen's playing pretty well. Bills, Lions, Ravens, and Kansas City are kind of like a first tier for me. Then it drops down: San Francisco, Green Bay, Philadelphia, Washington Commanders, believe it or not, and the Vikings next to get through the top 9. And then after that, we're kind of stretching credibility as a possible contender. Maybe the Texans and the Chargers, who are next, have some chance. You have the Steelers in your 2, who are definitely going to make the playoffs, it looks like at this point. But I'm not aboard the Russ rejuvenation campaign. But let me just discuss like some of this stuff and whether I believe it or not. I kind of lump the top 4 teams as being almost, you shake it up and you can choose whoever you want to choose to be the best team in the NFL right now. That is the theme. That's the theme of the NFL right now. And again, going back to these numbers I've had for how teams perform so far this year, the theme in the NFL for me is we don't have a team that's really doing anything that dominant. Like we have the Ravens, who have this great offense, which they actually didn't have last year when Lamar Jackson was the MVP. And this fantastic offense, and then all of a sudden their defense is now like bottom 10-ish for how they're playing so far this year. We have the Bills and the Lions with pretty good offenses, but their defenses are okay. A little bit better than average, but not great. Then we have KC, with their defense is playing really, really well, top 5-ish sort of defense, but then their offense isn't any good. San Francisco's offense is taking a step back this year. The Eagles, this is the team I'm going to want to focus on pretty soon because I talked about them with Hermsmeyer last week as being like my sneaky team. They're still kind of my sneaky team They got a little something interesting going on, but still not dominant in either way. And then you have teams like the Commanders, the Packers, the Vikings. You wouldn't have necessarily expected to be in this mix, especially the Vikings and the Commanders. Where are we confident in those teams? No, we can't really be that confident in those teams at this point. So I think the theme right now in the NFL is there's no dominant team. So if you want to lean on something, you can lean on more than anything else. I would say you could lean on Lamar Jackson, Josh Allen, and Patrick Mahomes, giving those teams a little extra something. Not only do we have their performances offensively for the Bills and the Ravens that have been good, but we should have confidence in those performances. And maybe we have a little confidence that KC is going to take a step up the rest of the season as Mahomes figures things out. So I'm with that. Now, the Eagles are probably my most interesting team here because kind of part of this is like parsing the model and knowing like the known unknowns, to use a Donald Rumsfeldism, not the unknown unknowns, but the known unknowns here of the Eagles is that the model's not properly calibrated exactly for when non-quarterbacks are missing time. So AJ Brown, I think, just by gut feeling, and also when you look at the results, and also you look at the type of plays he makes with big play potential that you can't replicate with other receivers, it's kind of the most important piece on this team. Now, of course, I'm not getting into whether he's more important than Jalen Hurts or not, or something like that. But he's the straw that stirs the drink offensively for them. We don't have that. You're missing a little something. And now that he's back, we're seeing some huge numbers from Jalen Hurts. We're seeing a running game that wasn't quite functioning on that level last year. And importantly for the Eagles, we're seeing a defense that's, not good, not even average, but not horrible. They're horrible last year. They fell apart at the end of last season, and everyone tried to put the blame on Jalen Hurts and Sirianni and dysfunctional offense when the reality was the defense just stunk. So, hey, is that defense going to be good? Because their division is all out of sorts this year, even though the Commanders are playing well. The NFC is kind of all out of sorts. At least it's out of sorts. As long as the 49ers aren't being dominant, it's kind of out of sorts this year. So I don't know. The Eagles, very intrigued here for what they could do, how they could position themselves for a potential Super Bowl run. Now we have Detroit continuing to win games. So if we're talking about like the probability of getting the number 1 seed, let's look here. Looking at some numbers here. Detroit's plus 150, the Eagles plus 400. See, they're next, right? So hey, maybe there's some chance of getting that number 1 seed. They're going to skate by with a fairly easy schedule. They have the 27th toughest schedule. So in other words, a bottom 5 strength of schedule, really easy schedule going forward here. Versus Detroit has the 5th most difficult schedule going forward by the numbers that unpredictable. Yeah, really interested. Really interested in the Eagles here. And I also think the Eagles kind of, they suffer from this, like, everyone hates Nick Sirianni and, whatever. He kind of looks like he's not my cup of tea. Not my cup of tea, Sirianni. But that being said, it's not going to matter that much if they're playing well on the other side of the ball. They have seems like they have leadership in Jalen Hurts and others, so I'm not that worried about it. So yeah, keep an eye on the Eagles. That'll be another thing that I'll sell a little bit going forward. Well, here's an interesting comment. Yeah, it says Jets being average in EPA with a 2-8 record is funny. Yeah, I mean, it's good for the commentariat. I'll give you that. The Take Masters on ESPN, it's good for them, I guess. I mean, maybe it'd be better for them if they were good. Now, it's not like they're great or something like that, but my numbers have them as they should be a couple of games better this year. The last 2 weeks, they should have been better so far this year. So yeah, when you're looking at kind of where they sit right in the middle of the NFL, not too far away from some others, they're about a 500-ish sort of team where things have just really not gone their way so far this year. And in a way, I'll point to maybe the Steelers a little bit on here, who have a average-ish sort of offense and a above average defense. I also think like the Russell Wilson reaction that we've been seeing, maybe there's gonna be some talk about them like being a playoff team because he's playing well. I don't know. Russell Wilson had one of those games last night where, well, his first game was like predicated against the Jets on some low-ish probability passes, maybe a little bit higher probability when Russell Wilson's throwing them than others when it comes to those moon balls down the field, all seemingly hitting or getting a pass interference. Then you had this last week where, again, some really nice throws down the field, but some third down conversions that they kind of got lucky to be there. And then sacks, which this has always been the thing for Russ, losing massive value on sacks. The fumble, yeah, the fumble's the fumble. But losing a lot of value on sacks and that kind of going under the radar. That was kind of I've again, for almost any player, any team, I'm always like too high, too low is where I see the market on these guys. I was always a big Russell Wilson fan where he was basically dismissed as being anywhere equivalent to someone like Andrew Luck. I mean, I don't know if he was better than Andrew Luck, but his stats look good enough where you're like, this guy's probably better than you think. So I was a big fan then. Then this weird thing happened where it was like Russell Wilson's the most underrated player ever when he was the highest rated he's ever been around 2019 or something like that. I actually put out a video saying that I thought he was kind of overrated at that point. People were not fans of that because, he always has this high CPOE, high completion percentage on these long passes. It's very impressive to look at. But then he takes these sacks that we kind of look at it and say, oh, he had pressure, so we're just going to discount that. No. Those sacks matter. Sacks matter a lot. Believe it or not, I was having discussions whether Mahomes or Russell Wilson was better at that point. Then, everyone got super down on him that he's completely done and should be, taken out back and shot because he's cooked. And I was like, well, maybe he's not so cooked. And now I think we're almost flowing over in the other way. I was shocked by some of the reactions of people last night watching the game being so high on what he did. I mean, it helps when your defense doesn't give up a lot of points. You convert some third downs and stuff. So apologies. I don't know if Steelers fans are Steelers fans out there actually believing they have a chance at a title this year because, I mean, anything's possible, but I'm not quite buying the hype so far this year. One other thing that I'll mention, which I thought was interesting going through some of these rankings, is the Broncos. What do we do with the Broncos? Again, probably not very interesting when it comes to if we're looking at the Super Bowl, but I have them dead smack in the middle of the NFL for how good they are. And I've been higher than the market mostly this year. Even now, the market's 23rd. So I'm still much higher than the market on them, but they keep winning. The defense keeps looking good. Bo Nix actually had a good game, at least by the numbers last week. I'm intrigued a little bit by them, especially in an AFC where you don't have a lot of other teams who are standing out. They could get into the playoffs. And if you make the playoffs, things can happen. They're basically plus 125, it says right now, to make the playoffs. So you take out some of the vague, maybe 45-ish sort of percent chance to make the playoffs. I mean, it's interesting, at least, right? It's interesting to see what could potentially happen with them because their defense does seem to be that good, at least by my numbers so far. So that's another team I'll look at. Everyone else should try to pay attention to that going forward. And then as I flip around, some others people may be interested in or not interested in. Seattle, sorry, not buying it. Haven't been buying it all year. Everyone loves Geno, I know, but still not buying it that much. I'm probably higher than Miami than a lot, having them 13th. Let's see, where does Unpredictable have them? I have them all the way down at 21st. Yeah, it didn't look great in the first week back, but the offense is pretty good with Tua there. So that's one where there's kind of a disconnect, I would say. Probably higher on the Browns now. Yeah, having them at 20th versus 25th, where they have there. So that's another team I'm a bit higher on. But Anyway, go ahead. You can check out the power rankings on the site. It's all available. Also, I have a Google sheet which I update throughout the week as news and other things come up. Like I'll make an update here with Richardson being out, where the Colts get a little bit of a bump up. Honestly, on this one, as things go. Not much though. Not much. It's almost immaterial, but a little bit. Um, so take a look at all that. Go check out the site. Go check out everything else there. I think I kind of went through all the different questions as I was paving through here. So I hope people enjoyed this. We're coming up on the hour mark, so I think I'm going to wrap it up. If you have any additional questions or anything else, you can go ahead and email me at it's unexpectedpts@gmail.com, or respond to any of the emails that come out on the posts, and I will see that and respond to you there. Otherwise, enjoy the rest of your week. Enjoy this weekend of NFL action, and I'll be talking at you again next time. Thanks so much.